Welcome back. The Supreme Court this week heard how the Royal Gibraltar Police went about organising the documentary evidence which now forms the backbone of the Crown's case in the Marache trial. Benjamin, Isaac and Solomon Marache, together with Leanne Turnbull, have pleaded not guilty to 2 charges of conspiracy to defraud.
Giving live evidence, CID officer Thomas Tonbridge navigated through several long, detailed statements in which he traces the manner in which properties in Gibraltar, Spain, London, New York and Jerusalem were managed by the former law firm prior to its collapse in February 2010. He did so using a number of timelines and graphics, which at times stretched back to 1997. The RGP evidence details Marache & Co.'s property purchases, financial transactions and mortgage agreements. One local property was valued at £500,000 and was being used as security on a multi-million-pound overdraft with GBC. Marache & Co. had reportedly undertaken to use the money from the sale of this property to repay part of their GBC overdraft. But when the proceeds from the sale came through, the court heard they were placed in the firm's Barclays account rather than to pay back part of what would become a £10.8 million overdraft at GBC. The police investigation outlined in court led to the arrest of Benjamin, Isaac and Solomon Marache, together with Leanne Turnbull, in 2010. The trial continues.
The Dr. Hiraldi Home Inquiry heard its final closing submissions this week, with the chairman responding to criticism made in the submissions of the inquiry's process and remit. Sir Jonathan Parker said he would not take up the time defending what he was doing and added that he will reach his conclusions on the evidence he's heard.
David Enright represented former Home Manager Joanna Hernandez, at whose successful industrial tribunal for unfair dismissal many allegations of abuse were first made. Mr. Enright referred to these and subsequent allegations, arguing there had been systemic and institutional failure at the home, and urging the inquiry's chairman, Sir Jonathan Parker, to look at the evidence objectively but with a passion to seek out the truth. Mr. Enright said the people of Gibraltar will sense very quickly whether this inquiry has cut to the heart of these important matters. Sir Jonathan said he was well aware of the seriousness of the allegations that had been made, and also of the evidence he'd heard to either support or rebut these. Lead Inquiry Counsel Robert Engelhardt QC responded to criticisms made by Mr. Enright of the process and transparency of the inquiry itself, saying the reason written witness statements were not published was in order to avoid broadcasting to the world at large confidential personal and medical information about the vulnerable people involved. Mr. Engelhardt also emphasized that as many people as possible had been contacted to give oral evidence, and that the inquiry's hearings had all been open to the public. Sir Jonathan Parker will now take all evidence into account before making his final report to government. No time frame has been given, but the chairman indicated that due to the vast amount of evidentiary material, this could take some time.
This week, the Chief Minister said housing, employment and health are the things that matter most to people, and that on all 3 the government is well on track to deliver. Speaking to GBC, Mr. Picardo repeated the commitment to house by the date of the next general election everyone who was on the waiting list 2 years ago. And he said he also expects the new power station to be under construction, if not ready, by then.
Collective decision-making is one of the traits this government most prides itself on. And today the cameras were invited in ahead of the weekly cabinet meeting where the priorities for the next 7 days are decided. A special day as it marked the precise midway point of the GSLP Liberals' 4-year term of office.
The highlights really have been the change in the way that government administers itself. If you look at the way that things are handled today, you've seen that we're in Cabinet. Every Monday morning we have a Cabinet meeting, we have an agenda for the Cabinet, we have Cabinet decision-making and collective responsibility in the way that government should be run. And I'm very proud to have ushered in that mechanism of modern governments to Gibraltar. We've also introduced a lot of electronic government already in between ministers and with civil servants. And of course we've seen fantastic economic performance in the first 2 years of the GSLP Liberal administration, which is well on target to meet the economic performance that we predicted we could have.
The government claims to have delivered over 250 manifesto commitments in its first 2 years. Critics, however, point to those that still haven't been. For example, on housing.
Well, my critics then would not understand what the machinery of government is really about. The need to go to tender, the need to make sure that you get things right. We don't want to run and build housing that is not fit for purpose, that is not going to be to the standard that we require for our people, and therefore that's why it's taken longer to start. But I'm telling you that we are on track to deliver on our manifesto commitments, which means in the lifetime of this Parliament. Housing, employment and health are really the things that matter most, and on all of those we're well on track to deliver.
Well, the environment, of course, is also important, and we still don't have the power station that you promised. Will this be built before the next election?
Well, as you know, you don't have the power station in the sense that it's not built, but you know that, A, you now have the capacity to generate electricity in Gibraltar, so that if you have a power cut, you don't have a power cut because of lack of generating capacity, which used to be the case under the GSD before. And second, that the tender process is about to end in respect of the new power station, and we are expecting that power station to be the tender awarded, being built or finalised by the time of the next election, exactly as we committed ourselves to do, but without any shortage of generating capacity in the interim.
Well, as we move into 2014, what can the electorate and Gibraltar as a whole expect to see in the next 12 months from this administration?
Continued economic growth, continued delivery of our programme, and a continued system of government which is modern, which is open, which is transparent, and which is what Gibraltar deserves.
The government is inviting proposals to develop the northern defences. The intention is to use the site for touristic and recreational purposes, and expressions of interest must be submitted by the end of January next year. Stephen Nish asked Deputy Chief Minister Joseph Garcia to explain where the area to be developed lies.
Yes, the northern defences are normally referred to as the jungle, commonly in sort of common language. But really, it's far more than just that, the area above the cliffs behind Laguna Estates. The northern end stretches all the way to Forbes Quarry, which is opposite St. Teresa's Church, more or less in Devil Star Road. And the southern end would go up to the wall of the Moorish Castle. So it's quite an extensive area. And it's comprised of the King's Lines and the Queen's Lines on one level, and the Prince's Lines above that. So it includes tunnels, it includes chambers, it includes open areas. So it's a big combination of land uses.
And some of those areas, the tunnels that you referred to and so on, are heritage protected. You want to ensure that whatever goes there maintains and respects the heritage value of the sites.
And that's right. Under the 1989 Heritage Act, they're all protected areas. It's a fortification, so it's a listed monument, which means that it's protected. It means that anything which goes there has to be carefully selected, has to go through the vetting procedure of the Heritage Trust and of the Development and Planning Commission. So the government is simply at this stage is inviting expressions of interest. We want people to come forward to suggest ideas and concepts for the area. We'll then evaluate the different concepts that come forward and make a decision based on that.
Has the government perhaps already received some informal indication that there are people interested in submitting a proposal for the area, and that's why you've decided to open this up now?
No, nobody's come to see me directly to discuss this issue, but I think there is a general policy in a manifesto for improving fortifications, improving sites of this kind which are abandoned in different parts of Gibraltar. It's starting to happen in the Upper Rock, for example. The improvement of Wellington Front went to the Development and Planning Commission already. This is just another one of those areas where a site has been relatively abandoned over the years. We feel there is a value to it in terms of tourism, in terms of leisure, and in terms of heritage, and we feel people should be able to exploit that and to enjoy it in the future.
Is there anything that would be ruled out automatically? I remember, for example, some years back there was a proposal for a funicular in that area. Would something like that even be looked upon favourably?
We were against the funicular when we were in opposition, so obviously we would be against it in government. But I think there is scope for opening up the area. I mean, it connects to Moorish Castle Estate, for example, on one side, and there's lots of tunnels which connect to the lower galleries, which also connect to the World War II tunnel system. So I think that there's a huge potential there for a touristic development, which will be very, very useful and an asset to Gibraltar, what Gibraltar has to offer. But also I think there are a number of open areas there, and those open areas could be available to the local community for picnics, for enjoyment, for children to have a good time and to take families around. So I think that there's potential for both a combination of tourism and touristic development with a leisure facility for the community as a whole.
Whatever proposals are submitted would presumably need the approval of the Development and Planning Commission, or could the project be submitted as a government bid and therefore not need that permission?
No, our intention is this would be a private project and it would require the approval of the Development and Planning Commission. We've already had soundings and consultations, for example, with the Heritage Trust and with other interested parties, so they're already aware that this was going to happen before the expressions of interest notice came out. But once we go through the process, if there are submissions, if there is one which the government finds particularly interesting, the intention then is to put that to Development and Planning Commission for approval, and the interested party would have to do that.
Well, I imagine that a lot of private sector companies may have to work hard this Christmas if they want to put in a bid, because the closing date is in January, isn't it?
That's right. We've given just over a month, but remember at this stage all we're asking for is expressions of interest. Once we find a particular scheme which is relevant or interesting or which we think has value, then we'd be able to enter into further discussions with the developer. But what we really, as I said earlier, wouldn't like to do is to leave the site continuously abandoned and decaying for much longer. We think it has potential to be a world-class tourist destination. I want to make it that.
Also this week, a local woman was sentenced to just over 2.5 years in prison after having pleaded guilty to theft and false accounting. Campaigners pushing for the George Cross to be granted to Gibraltar met with the Chief Minister, and the 6th Young Enterprise Scheme was launched with 12 companies and 120 students participating. For the rest of this week's news, you can also head over to our website, gbc.gi/news. Don't forget to tune in to Radio Gibraltar and GBC Television throughout the week for the very latest local news. And you can also follow us online on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you very much for watching. From the news team, good night.